Hello and welcome to Calm the Pharm podcast, where pharmacy business meets legal wisdom, minus the headache. In each episode, we share practical legal tips and real-life examples to help you run your pharmacy with confidence. I'm your host, Sarah Stoddart. Thanks very much for joining us. Today on the podcast, we're talking about the PPSR. Now, what is that, you might say? It is the Personal Property Securities Register. And yes, it may not be as exciting as it sounds, but it sure is important. The PPSR is a register where security interests over a business or individual or company are registered. And the best way to understand this is to think about when you buy a house. When you buy a house, if you get bank funding, your bank will put a mortgage over the property. That mortgage is then shown when you do a title search of the property. So when you do a title search, you can see that that property has a mortgage over it, and that is a security interest or an encumbrance over that particular property. Of course, when that property is sold, the mortgage is paid out and the security interest comes off. The buyer then gets the property without your mortgage, but perhaps with their own mortgage, which is a new security. When we are selling a business, there is no title per se. Whilst we can do a lot of searches and there is title relating to the land, when that business has engaged with a third party for the provision of property of any kind, that third party needs to register that interest, particularly if they're owed money, over something. And they do that on the PPSR. So if you are a business owner, there is a very good chance that if you searched your business on the PPSR, you would see a heap of security interests between you and third parties that you have an arrangement with. For pharmacy businesses, this is often your wholesalers and other suppliers. Why is this important? Well, it's important in pharmacy transactions for both the seller and the buyer. For the seller, when you are selling a business, you more often than not have a contractual requirement to sell the business on an unencumbered basis. That means there cannot be any encumbrances or security interests over the business. So when we are acting for a seller, we need to do a search of the PPSR to see what security interests exist. And it is okay that security interests are there. We then need to contact the suppliers or third parties that have that security interest over the business and ask for the security interest to be released prior to settlement. That usually involves the payment of money to close the account. So if you think about your wholesaler or other key suppliers in your business, they provide you with stock and then you pay them at a certain point in time, depending on your payment terms. So what that means when you're selling is we contact those suppliers. They want their money paid to them, so that they can then close the account. And I'll come back to the logistics of how that works and the problems it can create in a moment. From the buyer's side, the buyer wants to purchase the business unencumbered. So the buyer's solicitor is doing searches of the business to check whether or not there are security interests in place. They advise the seller of those security interests and kindly ask for them to be removed on or before settlement. The buyer's solicitor then tracks those security interests coming off the register and makes sure that there's nothing there when settlement rolls around. So it is very important because you don't want to buy a business where there are security interests over it, because that means essentially that a third party has given you something in the form of property and they have an interest in taking back that property if certain terms aren't met. So if you buy a business and there are still security interests over it, let's just say for stock, and the bill for that stock isn't paid, the third party can actually come in and take that stock out of the business. So from a buyer, that is a huge risk, obviously, that a buyer faces, which is why we make sure those security interests are off. Now, from a seller's perspective, it can be a little bit more work and a bit more of a juggle, because right up until settlement occurs, you still need to operate your business. So you really need to be organised with what orders you're placing for what stock, and making sure that you have sufficient lead time to have stock in your business so that you can operate, but keeping in mind that those accounts will need to be closed in the lead up to settlement. So that will prevent you, more often than not, from being able to place further orders with that supplier. Now, in terms of payments, you might be thinking, my wholesaler bills are huge. How could I possibly pay that without the benefit of the settlement funds? That is completely understood. For smaller suppliers, it can be paid out easily. That simply happens prior to settlement and the account is closed. For the larger ones, we can make a payment to the wholesaler or whoever it is at settlement in exchange for an undertaking from them, which confirms a security interest will be released when payment is received. So there's certainly workarounds for the seller to get where you need to be, but the important thing that you need to know, regardless of what side you're on, is that this register does exist and there are likely security interests over your business that give third parties a right to do things, essentially, if you don't pay your bills. Now, I have spoken about stock, but it also applies to motor vehicles and equipment and fit out, etc., that might exist in your business. If you're curious to learn more, please reach out. If you are looking to transact, either to buy or sell, it is important to keep in mind that this exists and is an important part of that process. That's all for this week. Thanks for listening. I'll talk to you soon.